In the heart of downtown Los Angeles, the pulse of the city was as relentless as the ambition of its inhabitants. Neon lights splashed vivid hues across darkened sidewalks, turning concrete into a kaleidoscope of electric blue, fiery red, and ghostly green. The city breathed with an energy that was both seductive and dangerous, an urban beast that devoured the weak and crowned the ruthless. Rico Sanchez, a member of the notorious Latin Kings gang, stalked these streets like a shadow given flesh. Born and raised in the unforgiving sprawl of LA's underbelly, Rico had learned early that survival was reserved for those who were willing to risk everything. Tonight, like countless nights before, he was driven by desperation and the need to prove himself. He craved a big score, a hit that would silence the doubts within his crew and earn him respect in a world that offered little mercy. His eyes, dark and alert, roamed the bustling sidewalks. Rico's gaze landed on a solitary figure, a man in a long, dark coat whose every movement exuded an eerie calm. Unlike the usual targets Rico encountered, this man was different. His skin was unnaturally pale, and beneath the brim of a worn fedora, his eyes shone with an otherworldly intensity. There was something archaic about his attire, as if he had stepped out of a time long forgotten. Rico's instincts screamed that this was an easy mark, a man distracted by his own thoughts and detached from the urban chaos. "Tonight's got to be worth it," Rico muttered to himself as he crept closer. With each silent step, he felt the weight of his gang's expectations pressing down on him. He needed to make this count. Sliding into the shadows, Rico positioned himself behind the stranger, his hand sliding into the pocket where his switchblade lay hidden. The cool metal against his skin was a small comfort in a night that promised peril. "Yo, man," Rico hissed in a low, threatening tone. "Hand over the phone and wallet. You won't get hurt." The man paused, his back still turned, as if expecting an intrusion. Slowly, he pivoted, and Rico's eyes locked with a pair of piercing blue orbs that seemed to see straight through him. For a heartbeat, Rico hesitated, doubt prickling at the edge of his bravado, but pride and desperation propelled him forward. The moment stretched, thick with tension, before the stranger finally spoke. "I'd suggest you reconsider this path." His voice was smooth, tinged with an accent that Rico could not place. "Not playing around," Rico snarled, advancing until he was mere inches away. "Wallet, now, or I'll cut you." A small, sad smile flickered on the man's lips as his voice, smooth and resonant, filled the silence. "You've made a very poor choice tonight." Before Rico could react, the man's hand shot out with lightning speed, clamping around Rico's wrist with the strength that defied human limits. Rico's prized switchblade fell to the pavement, clattering on the cold concrete. Pain shot through his arm as his captor's grip tightened like a vice. "What the?" Rico gasped, shock mingling with the sting of betrayal. His mind reeled as he struggled against the unyielding hold. Then, in the dim glow of the streetlights, Rico caught sight of the impossibility. The man's lips had elongated ever so slightly, revealing a pair of glistening fangs. A vampire," Rico stammered, the words tasting foreign and terrifying on his tongue. The stranger's eyes softened momentarily, a flicker of regret mingling with something far older and more sinister. "Yes, Ricardo Sanchez," he said, his voice carrying a calm authority that chilled Rico to the core. "And now, you must run." Even as the vampire released him, Rico's heart pounded in his ears. Confusion warred with instinct as he bolted into the throng of night wanderers. The urban maze, once familiar and routine, transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and looming threats. Every step was punctuated by the echo of his pounding heart and the distant, measured steps of the relentless pursuer. Ricardo darted into a narrow alley, his mind frantically searching for an escape route. The adrenaline surging through his veins numbed his thoughts, leaving only raw, instinctive fear. He clutched a discarded metal pipe, feeling it might serve as a meager shield against the supernatural force that hunted him. The alley, littered with trash and dimly lit by a flickering street lamp, offered little comfort. Every rustle, every shifting shadow, whispered the promise of impending doom. As he glanced back over his shoulder, the spectral figure emerged at the mouth of the alley, unhurried in his pursuit. "Violence won't help you, Ricardo," the vampire intoned, his voice echoing off the brick walls as if spoken from a vast cavern. The use of Rico's full name sent a fresh wave of dread crashing over him. It was as though the vampire had known him all along, as if their fates were intertwined by destiny itself. Rico's mind raced, the logic of the situation dissolving into the primal urge to survive. He ran blindly, zigzagging through the deserted side streets and darkened intersections. The city, once a playground of neon noise, now felt like an endless nightmare. Every footstep seemed to attract the predator's attention, and every turn led him deeper into a maze with no exit. The vampire, graceful as a wraith, trailed him with an unnerving calm. His presence was a cold shadow that pressed against Rico's back, a constant reminder that escape was slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. With each desperate stride, Rico's thoughts turned to his life, a series of hard choices, betrayals, and lost dreams. The glimmer of future hope had long since faded, replaced by the stark reality of survival on the fringes of society. Now confronted with something far beyond any street-level danger, his past seemed trivial, almost laughable. Rico's lungs burned with the effort of his frantic escape, and his mind teetered on the brink of despair. Memories flashed through his mind, the echoes of his mother's stern warnings, the brutal lessons of gang loyalty, and the hollow promises of power. All of it converged in this singular, horrifying moment, being hunted by an immortal creature of the night. The alleyways grew more narrow, and the neon lights faded into a monochrome gloom. Every sense was heightened. The cold bite of the wind felt like icy talons on his skin, and the darkness seemed to pulse with unseen threats. Amid the cacophony of his racing heartbeat and ragged breaths, Rico could almost hear the slow, deliberate sound of the vampire's approach, a sound that mocked his futile attempts to escape. He ducked into another side street, desperate for any semblance of sanctuary. His mind screamed for him to hide, to disappear into the maze of urban decay, but the sound of deliberate footsteps behind him left little room for choice. Panic tightened its grip on him, and his vision began to blur at the edges. In a moment of sheer terror, Rico stopped and turned, chest heaving, eyes wide with a dawning realization there was no escape. The vampire had closed the distance. Standing at the far end of the deserted street was the predator, his presence as inevitable as the night itself. The man's eyes, still the deep, unnatural blue, now shone with a predatory hunger that sent shivers down Rico's spine. "Please," Rico gasped, voice cracking with desperation. Please don't." The vampire's lips curled into a bittersweet smile, mingling sorrow and hunger. "You have run far, Ricardo," he murmured softly, stepping closer. "But fear is what defines you now." In that moment, Rico's mind was a chaotic whirlwind of regret, terror, and resignation. His thoughts raced back to every decision that had led him here. The late-night deals, the betrayals, the violence. He had once believed that power came from dominance, from controlling one's fate on the unforgiving streets. But now, standing before a force that defied nature, that belief crumbled into dust. The vampire's cold hand extended, and Rico felt a jolt of pain as the creature's fingers brushed against his cheek. A slow dread seeped into his bones, chilling him more than the night air ever could. The predator's eyes seemed to look right through him, as if reading the dark secrets of his soul. In that silent exchange, Rico recognized the stark truth. His life was about to be extinguished, and there was no redemption, no second chances. Time seemed to slow as the vampire drew closer. Every heartbeat was an eternity, every second an agonizing prelude to oblivion. Rico's eyes widened with terror, and his pulse pounded in his ears like a drum heralding the end. His mind reeled with images of his past, the brief, fleeting moments of tenderness, the faces of those he had loved and lost. Now all those memories would soon fade into darkness. With a final, almost gentle motion, the vampire sank his fangs into the tender flesh at the base of Rico's neck. The sensation was both excruciating and surreal, a searing pain that blossomed into a deep, paralyzing numbness. Rico's scream, raw and desperate, echoed down the empty street, mingling with the city's distant hum. In that moment, every fear he had ever known coalesced into a single, blinding terror. As the vampire began to drain him, Rico felt an overwhelming surge of revulsion and sorrow. It wasn't merely the physical agony that tormented him. It was the crushing realization of his own mortality and imminent fate. His blood, warm and vital, flowed away like a cruel river, carrying with it the remnants of a life filled with choices that had led to this final, fatal moment. Rico's vision swam with flickering images, flashbacks of childhood, the rough laughter of his brother, and the fleeting tenderness of moments he once cherished. All those memories mingled with the burning pain in his neck as the vampire's grip tightened, drawing life from him with a slow, inexorable rhythm. Every drop of blood that left him was a piece of his soul slipping away into the dark void of the night. Fear, the primal terror that had driven him to flee, now consumed him completely. It was a fear that went beyond the dread of death. It was the terror of losing himself, of his essence evaporating with every passing second. His heart, once a defiant drummer of life, began to falter under the relentless assault. The sounds of the city faded into a haunting silence as his consciousness began to slip away. Rico's mind, fragmented and desperate, clung to the final vestiges of life. He tried to muster a plea, a desperate cry for mercy, but his words were swallowed by the void. In his last moments, the darkness closed in, a final embrace from the monster he had tried so desperately to escape. His eyes, wide with terror and regret, slowly lost their spark as the vampire continued his work. The vampire's eyes, now filled with profound melancholy that belied his monstrous nature, regarded Rico with an inscrutable gaze. There was an ancient sorrow there, a recognition of the tragedy of mortal life and its inescapable end. As Rico's life ebbed away, the vampire whispered, "Your fear, your regret, they're as much a part of you as the blood that flows now." In the quiet that followed, the city seemed to hold its breath. Neon lights flickered, and the distant hum of traffic resumed as if nothing had happened. But on that cold, desolate street, a life had been extinguished, another soul claimed by the relentless embrace of the night. And so, as the final remnants of Ricardo Sanchez faded into oblivion, the vampire vanished back into the shadows, leaving behind only the echo of a life lived on the edge. The city, indifferent and eternal, continued its restless pulse, a silent witness to the countless stories of ambition, desperation, and the cruel, unyielding hand of fate. In that long, fateful night, Rico had discovered that the true monsters were not always those we sought to rob or defy. Sometimes they were the dark echoes of our own choices, the relentless, inescapable consequences that, no matter how far we run, eventually catch up to us.